Welcome to Inside Analog Photo. I'm your host, Scott Shepard. The Inside Analog Photo radio program is all about the traditional photographic process. We talk about all aspects of analog photography, including the hybrid workflow. You can find out more information over at www.insideanalogphoto.com. And of course, Inside Analog Photo is brought to you by Fujifilm, making life more colorful. These guys have the coolest instant photography materials known to mankind. They have, of course, the pack film and 3¼ by 4¼ and 4x5, color and black and white. They have the Instax systems in the wide format, the Instax 210 camera and film, and of course the Instax Mini, both in color film. Beautiful stuff. There's nothing cooler than instant photography. You get a print, because if you don't have a print, you don't have a real photograph. This is great fun stuff. This is great for art. This is great for business. This is cool stuff. You definitely want to check them out over at www.fujifilmusa.com/professional, making life more colorful. Our friends over at DR5 Chrome, black and white, developing that turns your black and white neg into, that's right, black and white chrome. Unbelievable stuff. www.dr5.com. Our official media partner, APUG, the Analog Photography User Group for all things traditional photographic process on the web, www.apug.org, and our official philanthropic partner, George Eastman House International Museum of Photography and Film, over at www.eastmanhouse.org. Today on Inside Analog Photo, we're going to be here with Robert Shanebrook. Robert was with Kodak for over 35 years. He's a graduate of the Rochester Institute of Technology. He's worked at many, many levels at Kodak as a commercial photographer, a researcher, a product development engineer, film manufacturing manager, and for over 20 years was the worldwide product line manager for Kodak Professional Films. We're going to talk to Robert today again about his book, what he's up to, and the current situation with Eastman Kodak. Robert, how you doing today?
Good. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for joining us here on Inside Analog Photo. Great to have you back on the program today to talk about yourself, your book, Making Kodak Film. It's an incredible, incredible piece of documentary history and technical information that I think every photographer should own this book, no matter if you're shooting film or digital. It really shows you the highlight of American industrialism and chemistry. There's a lot of things going on with Kodak that I think you have a very deep insight, with you being the worldwide product line manager for Kodak Professional Films for over 20 years, plus all the other stuff you've been doing with development engineering and manufacturing. This is a great opportunity for people to really hear what's going on. So thanks for joining us, buddy.
Well, thanks, Scott. The book was a big project. It took a lot of time, but it was fun to go back, and I always like doing photography. So I'm glad the feedback from it has been good, and I was glad to be able to give credit to the people that have done so much work.
It is fabulous, really, you documenting this whole process. People get film and they think it's some stinky piece of plastic, and people that have shot film for decades and then they went to digital won't really tell you the truth that they miss film. But nevertheless, let's talk about Eastman Kodak and what's going on today. So with you being the worldwide product manager for professional films, what's your thoughts on what's happened to Kodak and what the current management of Kodak has done to the company?
What's happened is a lot of the people have moved away from using film and are using digital cameras. That's pretty apparent to everybody. The management tried to identify some technologies that they had in hand and some they could develop to have some income coming into the Eastman Kodak company. They're still selling film, still making money on film, and everybody should realize they've still been improving films. Film made today is better than any other film they've made. They've made some improvements to motion picture films, to color negative films, and into portrait films, and Ektachrome films, and to black and white films. So they've been making all the films better in the last few years. But what's happened is they've been spending money on the printers and other stuff faster than they've been making money selling those products. So they've run into a problem with cash flow. As a result, weren't able to pay all their bills. The film business remains as a good business. It's still a profitable business. And I looked at some data recently that was made public, and they did make money in the fourth quarter of last year. I'm assuming that a good portion of that's from the film side of the house. So they're not going to back away from the film business, that's for sure. They still have a pretty good portfolio of products, all the black and white films and color neg and color reversal films, and sheet film and roll film. So from a photographer's point of view, the products they have are still good, and people should be happy shooting the film these days.
Well, you're right. I mean, the product's great. And really, at this point in the evolution of photography, we should be happy that we have film from anybody, never mind Kodak. So, I mean, I think to be a photographer that wants to shoot an analog capture, you have these new developed pieces from Kodak that they keep cranking out. Other companies keep making film. And I think people have sort of freaked out here about what Kodak has done with filing and how there's not going to be film anymore. One of the questions I have, do you think that the current management at Kodak would like to and are planning on selling off the film division so they can concentrate on their dry toner and inkjet printing business?
I don't think so, and for a couple of reasons. Long term, it's kind of the tradition and trademark of the company has been photography. And the second reason is they have a need to make a profit. And the film business, because it's gotten so lean and well-managed and efficient ability to make film, that it's still a good business. Environmentally also, so much work has been done for cleaning up the process and making sure that effluent's taken care of, whether it be liquid effluent or discharging of gases or such. It's a pretty clean process. So there's no reason that it can't go on into the future as long as people want to buy film. The limiting factor on the whole thing is perhaps people buying film, but as long as keen amateurs and professional photographers and the motion picture business is continuing to use film, there's no reason that business won't continue. It's making a profit, it's making a good product, and if people want it, I'm sure manufacturers, whether they be Kodak, Ilford, or Fuji, are happy to make film for their customers.
Robert, what do you see really makes money for Kodak and film? Is it the professional stuff? Is it more motion picture, or is it really the single-use cameras that we see hanging up in the supermarket and gas stations and everywhere where people travel? What do you think is really the key component to this whole film business at this point?
Well, I think the answer is probably yes, in that keeping the factory running is important. In order to keep the factory running, you need a certain volume, and they're busy making motion picture film, they're busy making professional film, and they're busy making film that are used in single-use cameras. I just happened to drive past the place on Saturday. I drove past both the coating plant and past where they're doing the packaging. And this is on Saturday, and there was cars in the parking lot and people were at work. So they're obviously busy. If that wasn't the case on a Saturday, I think people would probably not be in the factory working. So making film is what they do, and they're busily doing it. And as long as they keep the factory full, that's good news from a business point of view. The motion picture business has declined somewhat, but they just came out, I don't remember exactly what it was, but a new Vision 3 motion picture film. I'm sure you can find it on the Kodak website. So they're still improving motion picture films, and that's pretty reassuring from the film business point of view.
Right, because I'm sure the motion picture product, even with a decline, far exceeds professional level still photography. What's your thoughts, Robert, on marketing film? Lately, and I'm talking maybe the past decade, I haven't seen any advertising for Kodak film except maybe when they launched Ektar. I saw a couple ads in like an outdoor photography magazine or some aspect of that. But do you think that they should be marketing this film based off of when you were in charge of this stuff? Now, you were the product line manager, so I don't know if you were really involved so much in the marketing aspect, but during your tenure, you would always see ads for Kodak film and they were professionally pushing this stuff. And it seems now they've just fallen off the turnip truck.
Well, I think they're active. I attended trade shows in this country and others. And I think they're depending on their dealers to do some of that. But the professional photographers going through the various associations and trade shows, I think, gets attention. And also for people who work through labs. Dealing with photographers that are not dealing through a lab, I think they depend upon the dealers a bit. They're not advertising on television to consumers. We never really advertised on television to professionals because it's just too expensive for us. But it seems to me they're still trying to reach out to photographers. Today, the website's probably a more effective means of getting information to people than traditional magazines. So Kodak.com has a lot of information on it. That requires the reader to be active, of course. But there's an enormous amount of information on Kodak.com about films, papers, and materials, and about photographers. They're still featuring mentor photographies on their site. So that may be a more modern or more effective way of reaching photographers than ads in magazines, or certainly than direct mail, because people, I don't think, are really in tune with the photography magazines as much as they are in tune with pulling information off websites. I used to get a stack of photography magazines, and I think I still get one. If I want information, I'm not going to go pawing through a magazine. I'll just go to the website, search on the information I want. I don't even keep data sheets or any of that. If I want any information on a film, I just pull it off the website because it's going to be up to date. I'm not going to bother to keep information around that I really don't need.
How did you guys market to professional photographers when you were at Kodak? Is this something that they took your input into? Was the marketing thing separate, or was it really sort of because you were in charge of the full professional film line, something that you were involved with? How did you guys market?
I was involved with it in almost all the countries, but the guys in the local countries knew their customers far better than somebody sitting in Rochester was going to. So I was certainly aware of everything that was going on and fed them information, and this is what's an important feature of the film, etc. But people like Scott DiSabato is the one in the U.S. People here in the same job as him were the ones that would determine what they would do and how they reach their customers. So I was aware of it. Things have changed. Even 5, 6, 7 years ago, or even 10 years ago, we were putting things on the website and using that as an important way of reaching customers. And the other nice thing about that is they can localize it for different parts of the world. In the old days, every country almost had to develop their own ads and such. By using Kodak.com, they can customize it for their country, but they don't have to originate everything. So there's a lot more information available to photographers, not only in the U.S., but in other countries. And if you're in the U.S. and you want to look at a European website, there's nothing keeping you from going to a German website or an English website or the French website. So there's a lot of information available. And the web's really a better way of getting information because you know it's up to date. You probably have a higher assurance that it's correct, and there's a greater quantity of information. If you're putting an ad in a magazine, you're pretty much limited to the borders of the one page or more, depending what you pay for. But on a website, you can put in page after page. You can run video. You can run sound. You can localize it. It's just a lot more versatility.
What's your thoughts on a professional photographer to be able to stabilize their business? Do you think that we should go out and start hoarding film, buying up cases upon cases and going to Sears and buying refrigerators and freezers and just pack our homes full of product?
No, I guess I wouldn't do that for a couple of reasons. One, you end up with all your money tied up in inventory. Secondly, the film doesn't get better with time. When you freeze it or refrigerate it, it slows down deterioration, but you're not going to shut it down in total. Also, I don't have any fear that they aren't going to continue to make film. If I was a suspenders and belt guy, I really wanted to be careful and didn't want to take any chance on anything. I might want to hold 3 months worth of film, and I would rotate the inventory. Not because I thought I wasn't going to be able to buy any film, but I have other things to think about, and it's just one less thing I have to think about. And if I wanted to be even more careful, I think I'd put a mark on my calendar that every 3 months I would rotate the inventory. I wouldn't sit around every day rubbing my hands and talking to all my friends about, are we going to have film tomorrow or not, and worrying about it. Every 3 months, I'd take 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes, I'd go to the Kodak website and I'd see what they're saying. I would go to the website of one of the big dealers, and I'd look at their website and see what they're saying about film availability. And maybe I'd just call on the telephone to a local dealer and see what they were saying. So I'm getting information from 3 different sources, kind of asking the same question. Same question being, is there any announcement about any film that's going to be discontinued? I think what happens is people start working off the rumor mill rather than going to the source. The source being Kodak, one of the large national dealers, and my local dealer, and getting the information from them so I know what's going on. And if I spend 15 minutes every quarter doing that, so that's once every 3 months, I should have a pretty good handle. And if manufacturers discontinue a product, they usually tell you a year ahead. So if you sample 4 times a year, you're going to have a pretty good chance of picking something up if something's going to be discontinued in the next year. But I wouldn't go and invest my money in sticking money in buying a refrigerator and saving film and going through that. I'd just spend 15 minutes every 3 months, and from that I should be able to sleep good knowing that it's one thing I don't have to be concerned about. Instead, I'll worry about getting the right exposure or making sure my camera has fresh batteries or something.
So really, you don't think that at the worst scenario that Kodak's going to vaporize in the next 2 weeks?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. And that hasn't happened historically. Usually for a big company to make changes, it takes time. And if you got a factory making this stuff, I don't think they're just going to lock the doors and say that's it. I think what they're going to do is say, we're going to discontinue a product. Like in the case of Kodachrome, I think they told everybody a year ahead. I think they even had a year for getting processing or so before Dwayne shut down. So are things going to happen? I don't know. I have not much of a better idea than anybody else. But are things going to happen instantly? I think that's pretty doubtful. It's not kind of how things work. I think anything that happens is going to be a slow transition. As Kodak has discontinued films in the past or made changes or come out with new films, typically what's happened is they've announced they're coming out with a new film. They have the old film in inventory for some number of months or longer, and then there's a new film replacing it. So I don't think anything's going to happen instantly. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process. They only make film in one factory, and they'll want to keep that factory running, and it's the same equipment, the same people, the same chemicals that are used for motion picture film. And I don't see that the film industry is going to instantly switch to digital for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of the cinematographers aren't going to switch. And secondly, the theaters don't have the ability to switch instantly. So things happen, but they happen over the course of time. They don't happen instantly.
What do you hear from your buddies at Kodak, and really what is the thought of what's happened here with the current situation and maybe some input on the current management?
Well, they sort of in shock, and that we didn't think that they were going to have to take this step. I don't understand all the business reasons for doing it. I know it allows you to pay your bills slower, and that may be their motivation. But from a day-to-day work basis, people are still going to work, still doing the same job. It kind of doesn't have much to do with them. From a management point of view, everybody's kind of looking at the problem, and have been looking at the problem. How do you deal with the conversion from silver halide film to digital? And you've got to figure out how to go through that transition. The stuff they do in inkjet's amazing. These commercial inkjet presses, amazing technology. The consumer ones are interesting and good, and we can understand how those work. But the commercial ones are amazing. You should look at the Prosper Press and Next Press. It's an amazing technology, but it just isn't to the point where it's making money. So they're having to do these things. They're applying a lot of the technology that was developed, all the image science that was developed in the chemistry and the material science, and applying it in the printing stuff. But they haven't reached the point where they're making much money on it yet. So that's about all I know at this point.
What's your thoughts on the retirees? So you're a retiree of Kodak, along with a lot of other people. And are you guys worried? I mean, they have this pension fund supposedly, and then there's this backup thing that the government does. It's sort of like an insurance fund, right? In case something happens, the man steps in to try to cover it. I mean, what have you heard from Kodak as a retiree? I mean, you were at Kodak for how long? 30, 35 years?
35 years. Well, the thing that may change is Kodak was under no obligation to pay our health insurance after we retired. There was sort of a statement that they were paying it, but they weren't obligated to. So they have continued to do that. They don't pay all of it. They pay a portion, depending how old you are and various other things. Everybody gets the same plan, but it depends how old you are and how long you work there. They have agreed they've paid a portion of my health insurance and my wife's up till now. Whether they'll be able to afford to continue to do that in the future, I have no way of knowing. And I'll just have to wait and see. They'll announce it some period ahead of time if they're going to change how much they pay. Well, they don't have to pay anything. They could take the position that they'll pay less, and they'll just grid. Typically, they do things gradually, and I may have to pay a larger portion as time goes on.
So really, just because they filed, people that were getting pensions and health care weren't left for dead?
No, nobody was left on the battlefield. The pension money is set aside, supposedly, in a separate fund that the corporation doesn't have access to. And American legislation has been such that pension funds are pretty carefully watched. There's a number of watchdogs in the government that make sure that pension funds are used for the intended purpose.
So it wasn't like the GM deal where basically everybody got cut loose and good luck.
I'm not really sure exactly what happened in the GM deal, but the culture is a bit different, and I think Kodak has been more responsible in dealing with employees than some other companies.
Well, sure. I mean, wasn't that George Eastman's thing? You went to work for Kodak in, 65, 66 or something?
Yeah.
So wasn't that the thing when you went to Kodak was like, you're part of the family, we're going to take care of you until you die, we're a family?
Yeah, but there's a little bit on the other side that required that you did your job, and if you didn't do your job or you were out sick too much or you weren't contributing, you were probably asked to leave. But if you kept your nose clean and did your job and just did the things you were basically expected to do, you'd be okay. And if you got into a job that you perhaps weren't qualified to handle, they'd probably find you something else that you were qualified to handle. So they try to keep people, but there was a definite performance criteria. You couldn't just come to work and smile every day and get away with it. You better be doing what you're supposed to do and work hard. So there was always that challenge. Also, the people depend on you, so there becomes sort of a culture of you don't want to look bad in front of your friends. So there was a lot of pressure to do a good job.
Robert, tell me about the process of making film and what it takes. I think a lot of people think that, okay, there's something wrong with Kodak. Can't they just give the formula to XYZ company and they can make it? I think people don't realize the alchemy that goes into making film. So why don't we talk about that and how you really can't just hand this off to someone else because of A, the technology, but B, really it's the personnel and the equipment and how things are done that you just can't hand the formula off like you're making a cake.
Yeah, I've thought about how film is made. It's described in my book, Making Kodak Film. But there's some things that when you're real close to it, you don't realize that people aren't as close to it, might not understand how all the bits and pieces work. The first thing that's interesting, and I think maybe a bit unique to the photographic business, is that when Eastman started making film in the 1880s and 90s, he used a plastic material to support, some sort of plastic material. He used gelatin and silver and salt. That's basically a silver halide. And all we've done in the 100-plus years since then is use those same materials. The support we use is somewhat different than he had, but it's still just a piece of clear, stable, thin, flat plastic. So that's pretty much the same. Silver is silver. So the silver we use and the silver he uses isn't any different. Gelatin, which basically comes from animal bones and hides, we only use bones now, isn't a whole lot different than the materials he used. And the various salts, the chloride, bromide, or iodide salts, aren't any different. And what we've done, initially simplifies it, but all we've done in the last 100-plus years is made those materials pure and add almost in minute quantities some other stuff to it to make film. So if you think about it that way, you see we've spent literally billions of dollars and many man years in people's careers improving that technology and making it better every year. So it gives you an idea of the complexity of the whole process when to get from the films that were made in the 19th century today's films with such superior performance. All we had available to us is making those materials pure and adding in small quantities some other materials. So the technology involved in making those improvements and all the billions of dollars put into making an effort gives you some idea of the complexities. So simply saying, hey, I'm making a product in this location and I'm going to make it in somebody else's factory, it isn't easy to do because it's not just the materials that are there, but it's how the grains are grown. I use an analogy of snowflakes. What we're trying to do is grow grains of very specific characteristics. And growing those grains is very complicated, and you have to control everything for making tea grains, for example. And then the materials that are added to give you better spectral sensitivity, the dyes that are adsorbed onto the silver grains, that's a whole other thing. And then in the process of converting that to a dyed image in those dyes, so it's a great complex process. In trying to make it in Kodak's factory and then move it to somebody else's factory, that's not something that's going to happen. We had trouble moving it from one Kodak factory to another, so trying to say I'm going to make Tri-X in somebody else's factory, it's just not going to happen. Too difficult to do it. So transportability of products isn't something that can happen. Kodak doesn't want to do that. They certainly want to continue to make the films they have been making. But it's a complex process. The book shows that. I think it kind of gives the feeling for all the things that have to happen in order to make film successfully. I continue to say it's amazing that it ever works, but it works very well, and it works day after day after day. So it's not a simple process by any means.
I think if anybody has the chance or ever can get the chance to go inside of Building 38 and see what's there, it's sort of like the earmark of American industrialization and chemistry, and it's pretty wild, really.
Yes, it is. And you and I were both fortunate that we had the chance to see this. Now they aren't doing tours anymore. They're concerned about a couple of things. One, they don't have time to shut the machine down and let people come and see it run because they're busy. And secondly, they are paying so much attention to cleanliness that they minimize the number of people that are allowed to walk around in the factory. They identified things that they were doing that they didn't have to do anymore. The tours is one of the things that they've stopped doing. So I don't know of anybody that's getting a tour anymore. They're not doing that. So you and I were lucky.
We were, and even at that, you still have to put protective clothing on.
If anybody works in a clean room, they know what it's like. You had to go through an air vacuum thing. It's like a giant vacuum cleaner you walk through, and that cleans all your clothes off so that you're not bringing anything into the changing areas where that's clean. Then you have to put on special things over your shoes, over your hair, and you had to put on a special kind of jumpsuit that would not attract dust and would not carry dust. Then you had to go back through another vacuum thing before you could even go in the room. And the room is all built so that the air flows out, so that air is being blown on the film and then out, so there's no way that any dust in the room gets onto the film. That's all filtered, very, very, very clean air. And that is done through both the sensitizing and through the packaging. So dust is their enemy, and they certainly are very aggressive in keeping things clean.
It is clean. I mean, when you walk through the place, it's spotless. And like you said, the building's pressurized, so it's like the whole thing is a clean room.
Yeah, they're very conscious of keeping everything as clean as possible. If a photographer, a cinematographer, or a motion picture lab gets a piece of dust on a film, that's bad news. So they do everything they can do to eliminate that.
What's your personal thoughts on film? Do you like color negative or chrome? What do you think is better?
Better is an individual decision. The flexibility of color neg is nice. So that I can scan, I can digitize, or I can print onto paper. So I've got quite a few options available. And also, if you become lazier, the latitude of neg is nice, where latitude of chrome isn't quite as great. But for gratification and seeing bright colors and long dynamic range on a light box, it's really hard to beat chrome. I like black and white too, so it's kind of what you're into that particular day, I think, is what you have to do. They each have their place, and I'd be disappointed if any one of the three wasn't always available.
Do you think that with this Vision 3 technology that's bled down into still photography from the motion picture people and this latitude, that people are better off with that? Or do you still find chrome has better tonality? Why would someone want to shoot a piece of chrome?
Chrome sure looks good on a light box or a screen. If you're dealing with a print, you're probably limited to dynamic range of 200 to 1 or so. That assumes the difference between the shadow and the highlights, log 2.3. So 200 to 1 is pretty good. I can easily get 800 or 900 or 1,000 to 1 looking at a chrome on a light box. So there's a lot more pizzazz in a chrome than you're going to get in a print. So depends what you want to do.
What is captured on color negative versus chrome? The log ratios between what can be captured on a color negative versus what's captured on a piece of chrome.
Well, the main thing is the gamma is different. So the contrast, typically the slope of the line on color negative films is in the vicinity of 0.61 or 0.62. So you have a longer scale available to you on the film, where with chrome film, it's in the high ones. So that's different, but remember, you can only get so much on a piece of paper. So whether you're taking chrome and somehow scanning that and printing it on a piece of paper, taking color neg and putting that onto a print, in either case, you've got to come down to the scale that's available from the print medium. If you're printing on color paper, or if you're digitizing and then printing onto inkjet in some fashion. Those are the two most popular ways to go, I suppose.
Well, really, at this point, I mean, I think if you're shooting chrome and you want to do some kind of optical print, aren't you sort of SOL? The alpha chrome is gone.
Yeah, but you can still scan it, make a digital file, and print it out on an Epson, or you can send it to a lab that has a paper writer. So those options are available.
Do you think that I'm going to get a better scan and I'm going to have as much information in a file with chrome versus color negative? I mean, people have always said, okay, well, it's easier to scan a piece of chrome than a color negative because you don't have to deal with color mask and color issues. And really, like you said, when it comes to output, does it matter? I should be better in theory shooting E6 chrome. Or is it if I'm sloppy, I'm better off shooting color negative because, well, I don't really know how to meter and I don't have this latitude of driving it in the wall?
The information's in both of them. It's all a matter of setting up the scanner. Scanners have the capability of giving you good files from either chromes or from color negs. So it's all in being careful and setting it up. And yeah, you can be a little sloppy in color neg, but don't get carried away. If you're a couple stops off on color neg, you start to suffer. You can still get a good print, but it doesn't give you the flexibility that you would have with a properly exposed negative. If you have a negative that's well exposed, then you have some capability of messing around in the highlights or the shadows. But if you're right on the edge so that your highlights are starting to block up, it doesn't give you a lot of flexibility. You might still get a good print, but you might not be able to stretch it quite as far. So even if you're shooting color neg, you should be careful. Try to get the shadow detail that you require and just don't blow out the highlight. So it's all in being careful. If you know the zone system, it makes it a bit easier in that you can manage your shadow and highlight detail. I guess the answer is you can do it. You just have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, but it always seemed to me that real photographers shot chrome. Real men shoot chrome.
That was driven by the publishing industry. I mentioned the dynamic range. We saw this particularly in two places, the advertising business and photojournalism. If you go into the editor typically does his edits looking at the chrome. So you throw a chrome on a light box. It's got a dynamic range of 1,000 to 1, and it's going to be the brightest thing in the room is that light box. That's going to have a lot more impact on an editor than you go in and you throw down a C print that's got a dynamic range of 100 to 1. And that's how the industry worked, and the deal was to sell the image. So this has got an historical background. Now that's changed in that editing for most publications isn't done on a light box, it's done on a screen. But in the not too distant past, a lot of the reason these guys were shooting transparency film was simply because it looked better when they threw it on a light box. You throw a negative on a light box, it doesn't look pretty. You're going to have a hard time selling a job if you go in and you have a sleeve full of negatives and you say, boy, I got some great images here, you want to look at them. So you throw transparencies on a light box or a pile of prints, transparencies look pretty good.
Do you think that if you were going to shoot today and you're going to shoot color, would you shoot chrome or negative? Because it's going to have to be scanned no matter what you do now. You can be 100% analog and you can print in the dark room and you can do everything by hand. But you can't show your work off if it's not in electronic form. People carry iPads now. They're great for portfolios. I mean, sure, it would be great to carry around a portfolio of Sebachromes. Beautiful. Even better dye transfer. But that's really not the case anymore. So my thought is you don't hear of anybody really wanting to shoot chrome. But I think that it has so many different attributes to it besides getting into an electronic form. I mean, what's the contrast ratio on an iPad or a monitor? It's not like a light table.
Not very good. No, it doesn't have that pizzazz. But the practicality of the situation, if you're shooting for yourself, that's one situation. But if you're shooting for an art director and you're trying to sell your work, then you've got to have the stuff in a form that's going to look good to them. And if the decision is going to be made on an iPad or on a screen, you better make sure your work is going to look good on the screen. So make sure you can get to where you want to get to. So you shoot it as long as you can get to a good result. But it's one of those questions that's kind of hard to answer, but you have to get to the point that it's going to look good to the client you're trying to sell it to. And that's why I think negative wasn't used very much in advertising, because you didn't have something that would look good when you tried to sell it. I mean, photographer only may get 5 minutes to show their work, and they might not even be there when the art director's doing it. They may be asked to submit images. That's what's going on today. They're making selections off a screen. So I don't think I've given an easy answer, but it's not an easy question to answer.
No, it's not. I just find that it's great to see this new breed of photographer really moving into color negative, because there is this latitude that I can shoot at 2 stops overexposed or 2 stops under, and my lab can still get me a decent scan so I can make an 8x10 for a wedding album. There should be, in theory, more stops of latitude with a color negative over a piece of chrome, right?
Oh, there is. The math is in your favor. So you can be a little sloppier if you want to use those words for color neg. You can still get the tone scale. In portrait, as I recall, 3 stops over, 2 stops under, and you still can make a very good print. But the thing that the latitude really helps for is when things don't work quite right. If you're shooting with strobes and one of the strobes doesn't go off, or something happens where you get distracted and you don't quite set the exposure correct, if you're shooting weddings, then color neg will help you out and you'll be able to put it in an album. If you're trying to shoot weddings on chrome, you've got to be really good, and you can't let any errors sneak into the picture. That's why that business is basically a color neg business. That's why one of the things we did on Portrait was to try to get a little better under and overexposure capability, and we were able to do that. T-grains help you with that a bit. It gives you a longer straight line. So that was part of what was built into it. The other thing that was built into Portrait is if you have a variety of films, you can scan them with the same settings on a scanner. So it's less apt to have one print look a little peculiar if it was shot on a different film. And the lab work is a lot easier.
Right, but I always think as a photographer that if you can shoot stuff on chrome and nail it, there's more of a personal satisfaction of like, yeah, dude, I nailed that one.
Yeah, that's a personal thing for the photographer. And some clients require chromes. I think you're seeing less and less of that, but that certainly was the case some years ago. And if you look at a nice chrome in a light box, it looks pretty good.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, it's just interesting to see that with the dynamic range and latitude and all these great attributes when it comes to the current run of C41-based color negative films, that there's still more of a tactile and personal response and how when you hold the piece of chrome, even if you don't have a 4x5 or a 6x9 negative or a 6x7 out of a Mamiya RZ or whatever it is, that there's something different with the chrome. It's wow. And color negative's like, oh, whatever. It's just orangey, whatever.
Yeah, that's true. There's certainly more looking at a chrome in a light box. You've got a lot more range available to it.
What I find interesting, too, is if you look at Kodak, there's only a few options left for chrome. But if you look at Fuji, and maybe it's the Japanese market, but they have like 6 different kinds of chrome. It's interesting. I'm not trying to compare a product or better or worse. I'm just thinking like, well, why does the Japanese key market, right? Because that's what Fuji really goes towards, correct?
Yes.
Why do they have 6 kinds of chrome and we have 1 or 2 maybe?
100G is pretty good.
Oh, no, it's beautiful. I got it in all kinds of sizes. Maybe the Japanese consumer likes chrome over color neg because maybe they get slides. I don't know what it is.
Maybe a requirement of their commercial business in Japan. I haven't been in Japan in a while, so I don't know exactly.
I think it's a niche thing now to have a nice Leica and run around and shoot chrome. I don't know. It's a cultural thing, probably. Who knows? Robert, tell me about this folklore of the 18%ers. I think old school guys know about it. Some people wanted to be involved in it, but tell me this thing about the 18%ers.
Well, it was started by a guy named Bill Semenko, who had been a port of authority in New York City photographer, and then he was hired to Kodak as a TSR, and he ended up being the regional manager for the Eastern region. Bill started it, and eventually he let me in after I had proven to him I had something of value to help him. He had this little procedure that there was a secret question, which I obviously can't divulge, and if you did the recognition, you were also given an 18% pin that said 18%er on it. It was a lapel pin. It was simply an 18% gray card lapel pin with a number 18 on it. And Bill would go around and he would pick people that were influential in the industry and they would join that organization. He probably had hundreds of members by the time he retired some years ago. I mean, Jay Mizell was a member, Eric Miola I know was a member, Eddie Adams I know was a member. Not just New York City guys. Bill was pretty well known. Bill was sort of a legend among the regional managers. He had been a photographer. He knew photography. He was in New York City, so he had influence not only in the New York market, but a lot of the New York guys traveled literally around the world. So he knew what was going on in photography around the world. So it was an interesting organization, and if you belonged to it and you saw somebody else with a pin, you knew if you needed some help, they'd help you out. It was sort of like a fraternity that if somebody belonged to this and they needed some help, you knew that you could count on another 18%er to help you out.
Definitely. A very cool organization. Robert, the book. Everybody needs this book. This is like requirement. So how do we get it? Where's the website? This thing's been reviewed and quoted, I mean, everywhere across the planet, including mainstream media. Really, we've been lucky. We've been inside of 38. You've seen it, of course, because you shot the whole place in the book, but this is a fabulous publication, and no matter what film you shoot, Kodak, Fuji, Ilford, or some stuff from some Eastern European country, you need to see this. So where? How do I get this? Where can I buy it? How does this work?
Well, it's pretty simple. I explored different names, but I made everything simple. The name of the website is the same as the name of the book, and it's makingkodakfilm.com. Sell the book through the website. The only other place I sell it actually is in the George Eastman House here in Rochester, and they charge more for it than I do. The book, I think it's $29.95. If people mail me a check or send me a PayPal payment, I ship books every day. I've shipped books to over 40 different countries, and that works real well. I walk into the post office, and the ladies all know why I'm there. I send books overseas using first-class mail, typically reach any place within 10 days. That system's worked very well. One thing I'm happiest about is the feedback I've gotten from the audiences that I tried to reach. Photographers, they're just amazed at all that goes into making a simple roll of 120 film or a sheet of film or a 135 size roll of film and the coding and all that stuff and how it all fits together. So I'm getting really good feedback from photographers, from cinematographers, and from people who are responsible for collections now understand how the film is made so they can do a little better job in seeing if they have a problem or conserving images. Probably some of the most particular readers of it have been Kodak people. People say, this is what I did at my job for 30 years. And yes, you described how it works and how it comes together. So that's the other audience that has been very supportive. At first, I was very apprehensive about selling the book because I was afraid of two things. One, did I make any mistakes? And two, I didn't want people to think I was trying to take credit for something I'm just photographing. The good news is, if anybody finds a mistake, you can let me know. But so far, there's 3, and they're not errors in fact. They're typically a period appears someplace where it's not supposed to and that sort of stuff. So I'm pretty happy with that. And the feedback I've gotten from the book, it's just been very gratifying. So I'm delighted that people appreciate what it takes to make a roll of film and put together the story. And Kodak's never shared the story, so it's a unique story that other manufacturers nor Kodak have never really been forthcoming in giving this information. As a result of that, people learn something from it that they otherwise would not have an opportunity to know about.
That's right, and all I can say is order it. It's great. I mean, really, with the current things going on with Kodak, who knows about the stability, who knows what could happen. Another thing that I want to stress to people, too, is there's a certain amount of these books left, and when that's it, well, that's it.
You have to understand my goal. If I wanted to continue to do this full-time, I would have just kept working. My goal was to retire and spend time doing other things. So I wanted the information to be made available. I had originally thought of just making one copy and giving it to the Eastman House and let them hold the information. So if somebody needed to know how the process worked, the information would be available. But I decided that I really wanted to document it properly, and eventually, I stress eventually, Kodak gave me permission to publish the book. At first, I wasn't going to publish it. I was just going to gather the information, and it would be available for some time in the future. But eventually, they decided, go ahead and do it and publish the book. So the goal is to get the information out there so that people understand, as technology changes, this was how film was made in 2006 or so. It's not historical, and this is how it's done. Been a state-of-the-art factory, the best we know how to do. They've made very minor changes since then, so it's still consistent with how film is made today. But it doesn't talk about things that might have been done in the past. It's really a state-of-the-art. If you're going to make the best film that anybody can make, this is how you do it.
Chemistry can change, and they update things with sensitive dyes and all this alchemistic type chemistry. But really, when it comes down to the hardware of mixing and delivery, this is the state of the art. And it doesn't matter if it's yesterday or 4 years ago, there's no better.
Right. The flow of materials and how things are done and what measurements are made, all that is consistent because I still know people that work there. And if they do anything any differently, it's usually just a better material is used or something is used that's purer. But the way they're doing it and the equipment they're using is all exactly the same as is in the book. I took all the pictures, the years run together, but I think I started photographing in 2005 or 2006. It took me 3 years to do all the shooting, so it took a while. It's the labor of love. It's not a job. I tell people, if you're going to publish a book like this, don't do it expecting to make any money because the amount of time that's required is enormous. But it's fun. I'm delighted that I did it. Once the books are sold out, I'm done licking envelopes and running to the post office every day. So when they're gone, they're gone.
Right. So you better act now. Get it. You went to RIT to be a photographer and to do this type of work. So are you still out running around taking pictures? What do you do for fun?
I race sailboats, but what I do for photography is I do some commercial work for an optics company. They're very challenging. I think lenses are some of the hardest things to photograph because you got the shiny glass surface and typically a metal mount, so the dynamic range is huge. The reflections are terribly troublesome. The company I do shooting for makes very sophisticated, very expensive, complex lenses. And they range in size from 1/8 of an inch to 60 inches in length that was used in an observatory. So they range in a huge amount of size, huge amount of complexity, but it's fun to shoot. The other thing I shoot, I like to do landscape. So I shoot that on Hasselblad with color neg.
Fabulous. So, Robert, I appreciate you joining us today to give some insight into the current Kodak situation, just to be able to get your thoughts and maybe some reassurance for photographers, at least with your aspect of what's going on and what you know. And, of course, it's always great talking about the book, and we look forward to having you back on the program to chat about some other things, and we really appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Scott. Nothing better for me than to talk to photographers, so take care.
Well, there you go. Robert Shanebrook, what a great guy. An unbelievable book titled Making Kodak Film, the illustrated story of the state-of-the-art photographic film manufacturing. Again, Bob was with Kodak for over 35 years, and this book is really information for any photographer. If you love Fujifilm, you should read this. If you shoot any film, Kodak, Fuji, it doesn't matter what it is. If you love analog photography, this is something you should look at. This is a very complex situation on how they make color negative film, chrome film, all kinds of cool stuff going. And of course, this book gives you a little bit of insight of what's going on. And I do appreciate with Robert joining us today on the program to talk about the current situation with Eastman Kodak, his thoughts on it, and of course, more information about Making Kodak Film, his book. Definitely check his website, makingkodakfilm.com. The Inside Analog Photo Radio program has been brought to you by Fujifilm for their full line of instant cameras and film, and of course, fine quality Fuji Crystal Archive paper over at www.fujifilmusa.com/professional. Our friends over at DR5 for black and white chrome at dr5.com. And of course, our media partners of the Analog Photography User Group at apug.org, and our official philanthropic partner, George Eastman House over at eastmanhouse.org. I've been your host, Scott Shepard, here on Inside Analog Photo. We'll be back next week with more great analog photography.